Welcome to the Evolution Partners podcast, where I talk with the world's leading thinkers, planners, and doers who are helping to build great companies in their own way. We learn how the work they're doing is creating an impact and get to know a little bit more about them and what makes them tick. This episode is brought to you by Evolution Partners, where we help leaders to confidently build enduring great companies using our proven, structured, strategic planning process that ensures you build and execute the right plan. Check us out at evolutionpartners.com.au. Also, you can check out our books, Made to Thrive, outlining how to be a great CEO, as well as Onboarded, which is about making your new hires more effective faster. Mike Goldman is back. He's a leadership team coach, a best-selling author, and a trusted voice for mid-market CEOs who want to build strong, scalable teams. In his first appearance, we explored how to create a breakthrough leadership team. This time, we go deeper into the people side of performance. Mike's new book, The Strength of Talent, introduces a proven 5-step framework to grow your people, to grow your profit. It's built on decades of experience working with companies including Disney, Chanel, Verizon, and Ralph Lauren, and it's designed for leaders who want a high-performing culture. Today, Mike's applying this wisdom to mid-market companies. Mike's insights have been featured in Forbes, Fast Company, and Chief Executive, and his podcast, The Better Leadership Team Show, continues to unpack what great leadership looks like in real life. Mike, welcome back to the podcast.
Glad to be back. Thanks for having me.
Well, it's an interesting new topic that you've brought to us. It's about, there's been, I guess, a lot of books about talent and improving, and in our world, in the mid-market, a lot of, I guess, of repetition from the likes of Brad Smart and Pat Lencioni, a lot of, I guess, copying and so forth. But I think that what you've got here is something that's reasonably unique and going a little bit deeper. Perhaps you could just give us a quick overview to start, a bit of a synopsis. Tell us about the book and what it's about and what's the problem that it solves.
Yeah, so I guess I'll kind of roll back in 2020. I wrote a book called Breakthrough Leadership Team, and that was the last thing we talked about when I was on the podcast last. And in that book, I talked about the 6 pillars of building a great leadership team. Well, the 6th pillar was something called continuously developing and improving the team. And it was all about how to assess the performance of your talent, coach, develop, make the tough decisions to coach people out or coach people up. And while that was one of the 6 pillars, as I was out working with my clients, working with CEO groups, doing workshops, doing keynotes out there, 2 things happened. Number one, I learned a bunch more about, things that weren't in that book that I learned were, wow, we could do these things better and we can change these things. But more importantly, as I was out there with my clients and especially with CEO groups, when I would review all 6 pillars, the one that really resonated for them, the one where they said, man, Mike, this is a game changer, was that 6th pillar. So when I got bored, as we tend to do every few years as entrepreneurs, and I thought I'm going to write the next book and think about a new kind of ecosystem of products and services, I said, well, if this is where my clients are really getting value and I've learned a bunch more, maybe I need to dive deeper into that. And on top of that, although most companies think they have a set of what we typically call performance management techniques. We've got our annual performance reviews and 360s and performance improvement plans and all those things. I came across a study from Mercer Group that said only 2% of leaders believe their performance management processes are adding significant value.
Wow.
And I thought, wow, my philosophy has always been the number one driver of profit growth is people growth. And if you believe that's true or anywhere near true, and performance management is really only working well 2% of the time, we need a better way. And that's why this is such an important topic for me.
And that's the subtitle, right? To grow your people, to grow your profit. So That's amazing. 2%. I mean, why do you think that people, managers, leaders aren't doing this important job?
I think it's two reasons. One is I don't think we have the tools to do it. And I think what I have built really mostly over the last 12 years or so with my clients, honing with my clients. And although there were a lot of big, impressive companies in my intro, and I have worked with those companies, my work over the last 17 years has mostly been with small and mid-market companies.
Yeah.
So I've honed this. So part of it is they don't have the right tools. And I think I've created some of the right tools, and we can talk about that. But there's a bigger reason. The bigger reason is leaders don't prioritize it. Now, we talk a good game. Leaders say well, people are our greatest asset. That sounds really nice. But here's something to think about. So this idea, my mantra of the number one driver of profit growth is people growth. And most people go, yeah, I believe that's true. Then I say, okay, well, you know the cliche, you can't manage what you don't measure. And that's a cliche because it's mostly true. I say, okay, you believe that statement. Do we measure profit growth? Of course we do. If I go around the table of 15 CEOs, they could all tell me down to the 0.1% how they're doing compared to plan, how they're doing compared to last year. They know that. But when I say, how you doing on people growth? The answers I tend to get are pretty good.
Yeah.
Pretty good's not a measure. And that tells me, while we talk a good game as leaders, that people growth is a priority. It's not. It's not a priority. And when push comes to shove, and Brad, you've probably seen this in the clients you've worked with over the years, one of the first things companies cut back on when times are tough is their investment in people. Well, if you believe the number one driver of profit growth is people growth, and people growth is, and people are our greatest asset, that's the last thing we ought to be cutting back on. So I think partially it's not the right tools, but the bigger thing is we are not truly as leaders prioritizing it at the level we should.
A company is just people doing stuff. Okay. And for most of the teams that we've worked with, people is the largest cost on the P&L, on the profit and loss, right? And yet it's so neglected. I really think, there is a whole industry devoted to this. There's no doubt. But tell us, in the talent density framework, you are saying that most leaders invest in the wrong people. What do you think that they're getting wrong, and how should they be thinking?
Yeah, a big part of it is, and I know I did this for years as a leader, leaders tend to overinvest in their low performers and underinvest in their high performers. And they've got it backwards. By overinvesting in the low performers, what we're trying to do is we're trying to drag a whole bunch of low performers up to average. You don't get great by dragging people up to average. You get great by leveraging and challenging and developing and coaching your highest performers. And I know years ago, and by the way, I think annual performance reviews are probably the worst invention ever created in business.
Yes.
And by the way, if you're listening to this and you have a smirk on your face because you say, I agree, that's why we have quarterly performance reviews, you do a crappy process 4 times a year. So I'm not a fan of the annual performance review, the quarterly performance review. But there was a time when I worked for someone else and I had to do it. And I could remember that I had the easiest time writing performance reviews for my worst people. That was easy because they were screwing up 18 different things. All I needed to do is prioritize what are the top 3 I wanted them to work on because I didn't want their heads to explode. That was pretty easy for me to do. I could pick those 3. I can coach them on it, work with them on it. Didn't always have impressive results, but those were easy performance reviews to write. But what about the people that were better and smarter than I was? What am I going to tell them? I remember the only real job I had 3 years working for a footwear and accessories company about, I guess 20 plus years ago now. No, 30 plus years ago. Now that's how old I'm getting. Back in 1994, I remember getting a performance review from the CFO I worked for, and I was doing a great job. The performance review literally had 5 words. Said, "Keep up the good work." And in that moment, and by the way, I was 30 years old, beginnings of my career, looking for a challenge, looking for a promotion, looking to get better. Keep up the good work is what I got. And I decided in that moment, I needed to find my next job because I wasn't going to get what I was looking for there. And I have seen more superstars leave out of boredom than anything else. So while in my talent density model and in the book, The Strength of Talent, I go deep into actions for all levels of performance. Where I go deepest and where I really stress spending most of our time as leaders is what do we do with and for our best people?
It's a broad rule that I guess I've observed over time that A players will either, if you don't give A players challenging work, if you don't give them a growth trajectory, they will either step out of the business or they will drop to be a B player. So you think that you are right on the money, trying to find the way that we must have a growth plan for A players.
And here's a small tweak in how to think about it. And by the way, I had different labels for this back in Breakthrough Leadership Team, my book in 2020. And this is one of the things I've learned since then and changed. My motto was always, 4 different categories of performance: A players, B players, C players, and toxic C players. I've changed that in the new book and the new model, because here's what happens. I think part of the reason we don't spend the time and take the action we need to take for our best people is the way we label them. When we call someone an A player, it's like they've got this label on their forehead. They are an A player. In my mind, if I know, Brad, if you work for me and you're an A player, in my brain, I think, thank God Brad's an A player. I don't have to worry about him. I can go focus on my problem children. I was working with a brand new leadership team a few years back, and they were talking about folks that I was calling B players. So they were calling them B players. And they were saying things that frankly made me cringe, and it was my fault. They were talking about these folks as if B players is who they were. It's how they were born. Like 35 years ago, the doctor came out and said, Mr. Giles, I'm sorry, your wife has given birth to a B player. I'm terribly, like, they were saying things like, well, B players, they just want to go home at 5 o'clock, or they want to do enough to get fired and no more. And I heard this and it kind of snapped for me. And I said, wait a minute. I said, is it at all possible that they are performing at this level because of you? Because you're not leading them the way you should, because you haven't provided a vision that inspires them, because you're not coaching and developing them at the right level, because you've got too many low performers running around. And so I think how we label people, calling people A player or B player or C player, makes it sound like that's who they are. Maybe we hired wrong and we hired a B player instead of an A player, or we hired a C player instead. So although this is not as memorable as ABC Toxic C, which is kind of nice to remember, I now call them high performing, medium performing, and then there's 2 types of low performance. There's low producing for folks who are low in productivity, and then there's low culture fit for folks who are not living your core values, not living your culture. And while those are kind of boring sounding names, I would rather call someone medium performing, because that's how they're performing. It's not who they are. And that's a tweak that, frankly, I still have clients that say, Mike, I'm still calling it A player. That, getting my clients to make that switch is tough, because you get into a habit of what you call people and how you label people. But I actually think those labels can be very harmful.
Yeah. Certainly Microsoft in the 90s or 2000s, as I recall, had quite a problem because they categorized everyone into ABC. They knew it and they linked it to salary reviews, which sounds so obvious theoretically, but how it played out was Lord of the Rings kind of style. It went bad. But when you talk about that at the beginning, it makes me think about Bill Campbell, who they wrote a book about, one of the most successful coaches of all time. That book was called $1 Trillion Coach. And in it, Steve Jobs talks about Bill Campbell, and he said that Bill could turn B players into A players. Now, that's using the label to not negate your point, but I've always used that as a great benchmark for leadership. And it really begs the question, what distinguishes a leader who knows how to develop people and one who doesn't know how to develop people? What is the difference there, do you think?
I think it comes down to a few things. One is a true desire to want to develop people. And that desire not only comes from, hey, I really like coaching and developing people, but it comes from a growth mindset, the whole, Carol Dweck, growth mindset of again, believing that I may have someone who is performing at a medium level right now, but understanding that that's not who they are. That's just how they're performing, either by coaching and developing them to become higher performing in their role, or to say, maybe I need to change their role. I often ask leaders, what's something you can do? And literally, as soon as you make that decision, they go from medium to performing to high performing. And I get first answer I get is, well, lower their productivity targets. It's like, all right, no, we're not doing that. But, how could you in a decision turn them from medium performing to high performing? And it's not giving them a pep talk. It's not coaching them. It's not incentivizing them. All those things are great. But the way you could do that is by changing their role to better leverage their strengths. I've got a salesperson who's living the core values, great culture fit, but they're amazing at initiating new relationships, building and maintaining relationships, but they're just not closing enough deals. They don't have that killer instinct to close a deal. Well, if I could find a role for them that leverages their strength in building and maintaining relationships, but doesn't require them to close the deal. Maybe a business development role to build relationships with strategic referral partners. I can take that person from low or medium performing to high performing overnight. But I think back to your question, I think what differentiates folks is, it's a matter of having that growth mindset about other people. It's a matter of believing in something I call the law of positive intent that I did a whole TED talk about a couple years back, where you believe everybody's just trying to do the best they can with the resources they have. And very often we tend to, we almost believe people wake up in the morning and say, what could I screw up today? And I fall to that when people aren't doing what they should. I'm like, what's wrong with those people? But great leaders believe that everyone's just trying to do the best they can with the resources they have. And what that causes you to do is, instead of getting frustrated with lower performing people, you get curious. Instead of getting frustrated with people who don't agree with us, we get curious. If everybody's trying to do the best they can with the resources they have, what do I know that they don't know? What resources do I have that maybe they don't have? Or what do they know that I don't know? Maybe I'm missing something. So I think it's growth mindset. It's the desire. And maybe more than anything else is it's a curiosity. It's that intellectual curiosity, as Liz Wiseman talked about in the book Multipliers, that intellectual curiosity to say, what could I do to help this person improve their performance? It's there. I've just got to get it out of them versus, I guess I just didn't hire right.
Yeah. I'm talking to a group of entrepreneurs a few weeks ago, and I say to them, tell me about your team, your management, and someone pipes up and says, look, wouldn't it be great to have no team, to have no people? Like, you get the money, you get the business, but if you had no people, wouldn't that be great? And I kind of pushed back a little bit, and I said, well, is it the people that you don't like, or is it the fact that your people are not A players? Now, I'm using the label, but give me grace. And the person they paused for a sec. I said, is your reluctance with management the fact that you tolerate mediocrity, that you don't have clear definitions around scorecards, a lot of those kind of things? And the person really said, well, actually, yeah, if I had a high-performing team, that wouldn't be a problem at all. And it really speaks to the problem you're trying to solve in this book. So if I could ask about false positives, and that is high-performing people who are toxic, how do you coach leaders to deal with someone who delivers the results but doesn't align with the culture?
Yeah. First, again, I change the language with folks because I get that all the time. What do you do about someone who's really high performing, but they're a jerk or they're a bad culture fit? And I say that's not possible because in my mind, performance is two things. It's productivity and it's culture fit. Now, you could say, what if they're highly productive and they're a bad culture fit? That I get. And again, it sounds like a minor thing, but sometimes it's just tweaking the language. And, when I try to help people, first off, in my model where I actually have people, assess productivity and culture fit. And based on that assessment, they fall into one of these categories. So one of the categories is low culture fit. Low culture fit is if they're not living your core values, and there is a much more specific way we assess that, but I'm going to keep it high level. If they're not living your core values, if they are frequently having trouble with any one of your core values, they're low culture fit. I don't care how productive they are. I don't care if they're your number one salesperson or your number 52 salesperson. If they are not living your core values, or another way to say it for anyone listening that may not have a set of 5 non-negotiable core values, to me, a low culture fit means they're making the people around them worse and not better. It's a simple way to think about it. High culture fit makes the people around them better. Low culture fit makes the people around them worse. If you've got someone high in productivity, but they're making the people around them worse, they are toxic to your organization, period, end of story. Now, that's a tough one. For some leaders, I've had some CEOs say, Mike, I'm not firing my number one salesperson because they're not living one of the core values. And my answer was, I get that, and you're the boss. But here's my coaching. Please take all of your core values posters off the walls, because if you're going to allow some people to not live them and other people, it's not allowable, then they're a joke. And they just become a hammer you're using to hit low productivity people over the head with. So you've got to take it seriously. The other thing I find that's helpful is some people are hesitant to ding someone on culture, especially when I used to call them toxic C players, because toxic C sounds like you're labeling that person as a bad person. And that's another label that I think is harmful, because very often when we have someone who is not a good culture fit, it's not because they're a jerk, and it's not because they're a bad person. They're just a bad fit for the culture you're trying to create. If you're trying to create a culture of collaboration, we lift each other up, we help each other, no one says it's not my job, and you've got someone who is much more focused and much more natural, sitting in a corner on their laptop, curing cancer, and no one else bother me, I'm going to cure cancer, they're not a fit for your culture. There are cultures where that's exactly what we ought to be looking for. Yeah. Is the individual person who's going to go in and find that new algorithm or that cure for cancer. But so I try to help people by saying, if someone's a low culture fit, that doesn't mean they're a bad person. That means they're a bad fit for your culture. And when it comes to this idea of folks over-investing in their low performers, if you've got someone who's a great culture fit, but they're low in productivity, they tend to be coachable. Let's work with them. We may be able to change their role. We may be able to coach them all the time. No, some people don't have the capability. But if you've got someone, I don't care how productive they are, if they are not living your culture, trying to coach someone to live core values they are not already living is like trying to get someone to become someone they're not. Can they do it if you threaten them with job security? I need to see you more respectful and collaborative with the customer service team over the next 90 days, or you don't belong in this organization. Could someone fake it for 90 days to keep their job? Of course they can. But then they're going to go back to who they really are, which is not a bad person or a jerk. It's just a bad fit for your culture. And it's important as a coach. I find it critical that I open my clients' eyes to that way of thinking.
I think for some people, understanding the soft side, the culture side, can be a bit challenging because they're like, I know I've got to do this and I know I don't want to tolerate the jerk and so forth. But I look at it in a really pragmatic way. And that is that if a company is just people doing stuff, well, how do you get the people to do the stuff most effectively and efficiently? It's with alignment. So that means that everyone has to be working together, aligned to get the right stuff done. And if they're not, you will lose that efficiency and effectiveness on the way through. So culture is the mechanism that gets people to be aligned. There's a question mark hanging for me over this conversation that remains unanswered. And I'm going to bring you back to annual performance reviews. You brought that up and then you said, like, that's no good. And then you brought up quarterly performance reviews. And so I feel like there's still an unanswered question there. What's a better rhythm for ongoing performance and development conversations? What do you recommend?
Yeah, it's a great question. And just to drive the point home why I'm so anti quarterly and annual performance reviews, I use a sports analogy, and we can take, I told you I was in New Zealand. I saw my first rugby match, which was kind of cool. Maybe I'll take it out of the American sports, baseball, football, but really any sport. Let's take rugby, because now I went and saw one game, so I consider myself a giant rugby. But could you imagine having someone on the team that all season is screwing up over and over again? You know they've got talent. They were great last season, but this season they're just not playing well, and you know what's going on. And at the end of the season, you have a performance review with them to tell them what they were doing wrong so they could fix it next season. Would any coach or manager of any sports team do that, or would you give people more real-time feedback? I think it is ridiculous to wait to have the formal, hard discussion at the end of the quarter or the end of the year. That's not acceptable in the U.S. anyway. We call it Little League, like Little League baseball when we were like 8-year-old kids playing. They didn't do that in Little League, let alone professional sports, let alone our business. So it's a great question. Like, okay, if that doesn't work, what replaces them? And I believe what replaces them, of course, we should give people feedback in the moment. And I feel like that, is everybody doing that? Of course not. But that's basic enough that I'm not going to say that's the answer. I think there's a more structured answer in addition to that, which is effective and effectively structured weekly one-on-one meetings with your direct reports. And here's what I mean by effective and effectively structured. There are two problems with the weekly or at worst bi-weekly one-on-one meetings with direct reports. One problem is they don't happen. Leaders saying, I don't have the time to have one-on-ones with all of my direct reports. Well, I saw an interview with Marcus Buckingham, who wrote a lot of great books, First Break All the Rules and 9 Lies About Work. And they were interviewing him about how many people a leader should have reporting to them. And I thought he said something brilliant. He said, well, how many people could you have effective weekly one-on-one meetings with? And if your answer is, I can have effectively weekly one-on-one meetings with 15 people, then congrats, you're okay. You can have 15 people reporting to you. If you say, are you kidding? I'm so busy. I can't have effective weekly meetings every week with any of my people. Then you should have 0 people reporting to you. So number one is the importance of having the meeting. So the first problem is people don't have the meetings. Second problem is when people have the meetings, they get together and just talk about status. That's not very effective. So what I recommend, and I talk about in my book, is a kind of a 2-part process to weekly one-on-ones, and it's kind of odd weeks and even weeks. There's two different types of meetings. So, and I think each of them could probably be 30 minutes long.
Mm-hmm.
The first type of one-on-one, and call it, let's say you do that on odd weeks. The first type of one-on-one I call the accountability and feedback meeting. And that's where, Brad, if you worked for me, it's my agenda. I'm coming in with the purpose of holding you accountable to KPIs you're working on, to quarterly or annual priorities you're working on, different projects. I'm going to hold you accountable. I'm going to give you feedback for what I think you're doing really well and what I want to see you change. Maybe feedback on how you're living or not living certain core values. So that's my agenda. It goes above and beyond a weekly accountability meeting you may have with your team. This is a chance for us to dig a little deeper one-on-one. So one type of meeting every other week is the accountability and feedback meeting. The second type of meeting is the coaching meeting. Let's say that happens on even weeks. In the coaching meeting, Brad, if you work for me, that's your agenda. And that probably looks very much like when you or I do one-on-one coaching with our clients, where when I'm coaching you, you report to me, it's your agenda. You come to me every other week with something that you want to work on, with something you're having a challenge with, or you have a question on, or an opportunity, or something. And my job as your leader and as a good coach is I'm going to ask you questions to surface the right action for you. I'm not going to automatically give you advice because I might be solving the wrong problem. I also might be teaching you to just come back to me and ask for advice the next time, where if I'm asking questions, I'm modeling a way of thinking for you to come to the right action for you. And my experience with my clients is that if you could effectively have those two types of meetings, even odd weeks, accountability and feedback meeting, even weeks, coaching meeting, then all of the things that you might have waited till the end of the quarter or the end of the year to talk about, all of the things that may not happen in the immediate and in the moment feedback and coaching we have for people, those things happen in those one-on-one meetings. And while I have no problem with, maybe once a year or once a quarter saying, hey, let's get together and let's do some planning together, and maybe let's goal set together, that's all great. But as far as what we typically do in an annual performance review, I think it's crazy to wait until the end of the quarter or the end of the year when we should be doing that real time in the moment, but be every week through our one-on-one process. That's when we need to be having those conversations, when people have the ability to actually react to it.
Thank you. That's a great and detailed answer with some fantastic insights. I want to ask you about the talent density indicator that you've developed as a measure of team strength. So if you can, please tell us, how does it work and how do you see mid-market or mid-sized companies applying it practically?
Yeah, so first, what it is it's a KPI that measures how you're doing growing your people. And it's like I said before, again, my mantra, my clients hear me say over and over again, they finish the sentence before I do. The number one driver of profit growth is people growth. We better have a way to measure people growth, or it becomes near impossible to hold ourselves or others accountable for growing our people. So I've created this thing called the TDI, the Talent Density Indicator. And very simply is, in my model, there are high performing folks, medium performing folks, low producing folks, and low culture fit folks. The Talent Density Indicator is the percent of your people that you're evaluating. It could be, you can create a TDI just for you and your team. You can create it for your company. You can create it for just your direct reports. But the talent density indicator is the percent of the folks you've evaluated that are high performing minus the percent that are low performing, which is either low producing or low culture fit. And when you calculate that, kind of like a net promoter score, if you're familiar with that, when you calculate that, you're going to wind up with a number that's somewhere between negative 100%. If I have 0% high performing, 100% low performing, that number is going to be negative 100%. or positive 100%, which is everybody's high performing. If everybody's medium performing, I end up with 0%. I've got 0 high performing, 0 low performing, 0 minus 0 is 0. And you wind up with this number. And when I first do this with clients, I first have CEOs do this in my CEO workshops. Some folks end up where I'm like, what's your TDI after doing the evaluation? And they say negative 40, negative 20. And they've got this pained look on their face, as they should, right? That means they got more low performing folks than high performing folks. And after I ask them if they're getting any sleep at all, what I tell them is it's okay to be frustrated, maybe a little bit upset by it, but take a deep breath and then realize all this is a benchmark. If you're at negative 40, that's where you are. Set a goal 90 days from now to be at negative 20. That's an improvement. And all it may take to go from negative 40 to negative 20 or negative 10 is to take one medium performing person, coach them up to high performing, and maybe take one of your low culture fit folks who you've coached to death and is still not able to get up to live your core values. Maybe they need to be coached out of the organization, which may be good for you and good for them. That's all it may take to go from negative 40 to negative 20. But this idea of the talent density indicator becomes a number we could look at to measure how we're doing and whether we're trending up or trending down. To look at I believe CEOs, one of the ways they should measure the performance of each of the members of their senior leadership team is what's their TDI and how is it trending? If, one of our key responsibilities as leaders should be growing our people, let's have that measure there to grow our people. And that's been one of the biggest aha moments for my clients and folks in my audiences for my keynotes and workshops, is not only having a model that allows them to figure out where people are performing and based on that know exactly what actions they ought to take, but having an actual measure where they could see where they are, they know how to get better, and then they could measure whether they've got better or not, because that measurement's typically anecdotal. I coached this person out. This person's, I think, doing a little bit better. One of my high performers left, but I think I hired. It's like a bunch of anecdotes on how they're doing. But if we could have an actual number that we could use to hold ourselves and others accountable for, and that we could use to do some goal setting on that moving forward.
How do you see artificial intelligence impacting the teams that you're working with at the moment? How do you see that? How do you foresee that into the future impacting the TDI?
It's amazing the extremes that I have clients using AI or being impacted by AI. I have some clients where I am desperately trying to drag them into the AI world while they say, you don't understand, this doesn't impact my business, and that stuff's dumb anyway, and it doesn't really work. And then I've got other clients. They must be the
same clients that I'm talking to.
Maybe we're working with the same ones. And then I have others that blow me away with some of the work they're doing. And, I think that I don't care what industry you're in, and I don't care whether you're growing at 50% a year or you're shrinking and worried about going out of business. I don't care where you are. If you don't understand not only the impact AI could have on your business today, but how quickly it's moving. And just then something new came out that could totally change our lives. It's, I'll be more personal about it. I'll talk about how it's impacting my business. So I've taken all of my books and all of my social media and content I have from everywhere, all of the transcripts from my solo podcast episodes. And I'm working with a startup that has built for me a couple of AI agents where my clients, and actually I've broadened it outside of my clients. It's out there for free now. My Ask Mike AI is out there where folks can go in and get coaching on how to build a better leadership team. They can go in if they're having trouble figuring out what their big, hairy, audacious goal should be, or what their core, how to implement their core values, or they're having problems with a low performer and they're not sure whether they can coach them up or coach them out, or they're trying to figure out how they could best challenge one of their best performers to make sure that they're improving and they're growing and they never want to leave. And this thing, frankly, it didn't take much. I mean, the work on my end has been my 35 plus years of experience that have now gone into the tool. But I actually had a client say to me, tongue in cheek, but I take it seriously, said, Mike, this thing is already smarter than you. So immediately I said, I'm going to talk to my developer and dumb it down because I don't want my clients to fire me and just use the AI. But I look at that and I imagine a world where you talk about how it impacts the TDI right now. So I'm working on a web-based application to automate these things I'm talking about and actually have leaders put in this system not only their evaluations of folks, but if I'm evaluating someone, what actions am I committed to taking with them? I'm going to raise the bar on their productivity measures. I'm going to talk to them about, better collaborating with the customer service team. I'm going to send them off to this training or, whatever, put it in the system so you could be held accountable for it. Now that in and of itself is that accountability for actions is critical. But here's where I see the AI taking it is why can't the AI get that information of how they're doing on culture fit? Which core values are they living or not living? Which productivity measures are they blowing away? Which ones are they having trouble with? What are your company's goals? What's your company's vision? What are your company's strategies for the over 3 years? Your priorities, feed all that in. And why can't the AI suggest to the leader, hey, I notice Brad is not closing deals at the level you want him to. Would you like some coaching on some options that may help you do that in the same time, make sure they're aligned with this annual priority I know you have to double your revenue from products and services. Like I see the AI, not that the AI is necessarily anytime soon going to be the ones that I'd recommend. Oh, have the AI do your one-on-one meetings. You don't need to coach them. But why not use the AI as a coach to help you coach your people? I created an AI, got a set of prompts and instructions from another keynoter that I know of, where in ChatGPT, I've created a custom GPT that has my board of directors. I have Jim Collins on my board of directors and Seth Godin on my board of directors and Tony Robbins on my board of directors and Warren Buffett on my board of directors, where I have the ability, and I used it today to help me figure out a new licensing program for my intellectual property and email back and forth with someone interested in that program, where I asked my board of directors how to create this, what I need to do, and how I should respond to someone that's inquiring. And it was beautiful. It was stuff I never would have thought of. And my best leadership teams are using it in that way to help them make decisions, to add values to my clients. And others are kind of kicking and screaming and I'm pulling them along. But there's really a pretty wide range right now I'm seeing.
Yeah. It's a very rapidly changing environment, very similar tales on this side of the world.
And by the way, the one challenge I have for all my clients is we need to figure out how AI is going to kill your business, and we need to create that before somebody else does. That's a way to think about it.
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it. I guess in terms of what you and I do, I'm not young enough to not remember when you could buy a business plan where it said insert company name and it was a pro forma. You'd print it out on Word, you'd type it, whatever, and you'd put it there and then you'd present it to the bank. But the world is vastly different now. And our job is to get the team to build the plan, because the team who build the plan don't fight the plan and then they've got to go and execute it. So there are components of that I think are very hard for AI to emulate, especially around alignment, which is your topic, right? Talent density, getting the people to do the work. Like, I think that probably brings us to a bit of a close. I'd like to ask you a question about a better business. So for you, what do you think that a better business looks like and the teams that you work with?
For me, I guess I'll go back to my definition of what a great company is. And I think a great company is three things. I think a great company has three characteristics, no one being any more important than the other. They all go together. And one is, I do think, and this may go against your philosophy, or it may be consistent with it. It may just be semantics. But I think a great company has consistent and significant top and bottom line growth. And the reason I say, and by the way, again, it's not the only thing, but the reason why I believe it's important is because if you have consistent and significant top and bottom line growth, I think that gives you the ability to attract and retain and invest in amazing talent. If you are growing at 3 to 5% a year, barely inflation, it's very difficult for you to attract great people. It's very difficult for you to keep the great people you have, because if people can't grow with you, they're going to grow with someone else. So I do think that growth component is important. But I also believe if you are growing consistently and significantly, but you wake up every morning and dread starting work, you don't have a great company. So the second characteristic is a growing, fulfilling environment for you and for your team. It's not just building growth on the backs of your people. It's not building growth for the sake of growth. We want to create a growing, fulfilling environment. And by the way, if we don't have a growing, fulfilling environment, I don't think we're going to have consistent top and bottom line growth for very long. And then the third thing, which sounds almost obvious, but it's not, is we need to be having impact. Great company needs to be having some positive impact on the world. Now, when people hear impact on the world, they think, climate change or peace in the Middle East or, feeding the hungry. And if that's what you do, thank you for your service. That's great. But impact on the world could be fixing somebody's leaky pipes or building a home, or helping a company with their marketing tools. Could be a lot of things, but if you are not consistently adding value, you're not going to see that top and bottom line growth. If you don't have the top and bottom line growth, it's hard to keep that growing, fulfilling environment growing. So I think a great company is a company that is consistently doing all three of those things.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. And I wiped the sweat from my brow because I thought that you were going to say a better business is a bigger business. Yeah,
you got to bet. It's got to start with a B. If you're not $1 billion business, man, forget it.
Yeah. We knew the title of the book, Bigger Isn't Better, Better is Better. Mike, that's fantastic. And I like the depth of insight, right? Yes, it's thematically similar to some of the things I talk about in the book. What is a book that you would recommend for our audience?
Love, and I guess consistent with the theme of coaching and developing people. And I know you had this gentleman on your podcast, and I envy you because I want to get him on my podcast, and he hasn't agreed to do it yet. But I love a book called The Coaching Habit by Michael Bungay Stanier. And not only is that a great read, and he's wonderful, but most leaders I work with are not very good coaches. They think they are because they give good advice, but they're not very good coaches. And The Coaching Habit is the best book I've read, not on building a coaching business like you or I have. It's the best book I've ever read to help leaders do a better job of coaching their people.
I attended a presentation by Michael in Melbourne many years ago, and it was about the coaching habit, and he's got these key questions. We had to go and find a person that we didn't know in the audience and ask them those questions. And I found a principal of a religious school who I didn't know until I asked him the questions, which I had very little in common with. And we worked through the series of questions as instructed. And it was fascinating, I tell you. It's such a simple and powerful method to get into the role of a coach in a relationship. It was fantastic.
Yeah, it really is.
How can people learn more about you and your business, Mike? And when is the book coming out?
Yeah, so the book is coming out October 14th. Super excited. It will be on a bestseller list. That's my goal, and not Amazon bestseller. USA Today in the US, USA Today bestseller list is the goal. So really pushing for that. So where I'm going to point people to two different places, but number one, to learn more about the book and pre-order the book, it's strengthoftalent.com. So that would be the major place to go. If you do that and pre-order it, there are, I think it's over $400 worth of bonuses you get by ordering the book. So strengthoftalent.com for the book, number one. And then number two would be, if anybody wants to find out more about me and my coaching, it's Mike Goldman. And then I guess the third thing would be super proud of the podcast I had. I think, Brad, you may have been guest number 5 or 4 or something like that. So check out Brad's episode of my podcast, but that's called the Better Leadership Team Show, and super proud of that podcast.
Lovely, lovely. And what haven't we discussed that you wanted to cover off today?
No, you know what? I guess the one thing I'll say, and this is going to sound like I'm kissing up to you, but I don't need to. The episode's done. If I was going to kiss up, I'd kiss up at the beginning. But I will tell you, one of the first book recommendations I make to all of my CEOs is Made to Thrive. And the reason I do is because most CEOs have no idea what their job is. You know, I was talking to one of my CEOs, a newer client, a few months ago, and he literally believed his job. And he said this to his leadership team. He said, guys, my job is to help you do your jobs. So tell me where I could help. And I said, stop. That is not your job. And so I told him a little bit about what I thought his job was, but then I recommended your book. So kissing up a little bit at the end of the podcast. But that I think is super important. And even when it comes to this whole talent density framework, setting the right expectations for folks so they understand what their job really is, not just core values, but what are the measures of success. The first person that's important to is the CEO. Because if the CEO doesn't get it right, it's going to be tough for everybody else to get it right. So if you haven't read Made to Thrive, and I know you got your new book coming out, but if you haven't read Made to Thrive, make sure you're reading it.
Mike, that's very humbling and kind. Thank you, and also thank you so much for sharing your wisdom. I think the book is a cracker, and it really, it goes deep on a very important subject, for most leaders in most mid-market companies. So thank you so much for sharing your wisdom today, Mike.
Thank you. It was fun.
Well, I hope you enjoyed the episode as much as I did. If you'd be kind enough to leave a review for the podcast, that'd be really helpful to other like-minded entrepreneurs, and then we can grow our community. If you want to find out more about our guests, head over to evolutionpartners.com.au/podcast, where you can find show notes and other additional reading. Hope to see you back next week. Until then, keep thriving.